Okay, now I want to talk about how to create a lighting studio setup for the models that you may want to be lighting and rendering. To do that, we're going to use Shift A, add a mesh, and in this case, we're going to add a plane. And let's just scale this up, basically making a really large floor. And if we tab to edit, press 2 on the keyboard to go to edge select mode, we can extrude vertically a back wall. And so I'm going to press Z to constrain that to the Z axis. And so now we've kind of got a large floor and a large wall. And instead of this being a hard kind of crease here at the bottom, I want to bevel this and make it nice and smooth. So pressing T in the keyboard, I can pull out my tools if you don't have them visible. And I will just go to the bevel tool and just pull a bevel out. And so right now it just might make one bevel face here. So instead of that, we can add segments. So let's add a few segments. That looks pretty good. And I'm just gonna go back to the select tool here, click anywhere. And if we tab back out, you can see it's faceted, which is not how we want it to render. So let's right click and shade smooth. And there's other ways to do this as well, but this is a pretty easy method to just get a nice smooth curve here. And so that's essentially going to be our backdrop and our floor. If we go ahead and add a model to the scene, so I'm going to enable my collection here, you can see it's a little bit below, so we can take the whole floor and just move it down. Okay, so our floor is going to be right here along this y-axis. So let's just select the plane, press G, Z, and move it down here to the bottom. And if we go into wireframe mode, it may be easier to actually see the plane. And so let's do GZ to just get it really close. You don't want the object to be hovering above because sometimes you can tell. So just get in as close as you can and just, it can actually intersect a tiny bit if you want, but I would just be as precise as you can with sitting it right on top. Okay, let's turn shading mode back on here. And let's look through our camera. So I actually set up a new camera here. And if you want to create a new camera, it's pretty easy. You just do Shift A, go down to camera, and then it adds one here to your outliner. You can rename this, of course, if you have a particular name. I don't need to rename this, and I'm just going to delete this here in the outliner. I already have a camera set up. So if you're wondering how you can look through this camera versus looking through the collection's default camera, it's pretty easy to do. You just go down here to scene settings, and it looks like a cone and a sphere and something kind of a collection of items icon. And at the top here, you can set the default camera for the scene, and that just links up to this button here. So if we just clear that out, you can use the eyedropper to select it, or you could just click in the middle and select your camera. If you have a lot of cameras, I definitely recommend renaming them to something that is going to help you understand what it is. Okay, so now if we click on that, you can see our camera's active. If we want to select our camera, there's a couple ways. We can select it here in the outliner. And if I just kind of select the plane, you can also, while looking through the camera, select this red dotted outline, and that will select your camera as well while you're in the viewport. So that's a little handy trick. And then down here, you can see we have camera options available to us, so we can change these settings. We'll do that a bit later. So for now, let's get back to our backdrop. If we go into render mode, depending on whether you adjusted these settings, you'll likely see EV as the default render mode. EV is Blender's real-time rendering system, and it does a pretty good job. You have to do a bit of configuration to get it to look good. For this, we can use cycles, and cycles is going to take longer to render, but the renders typically look better, and that's because it's not rendering real time. Okay, so it's a bit dark in our scene, and you may have noticed this. You actually have a default light. I have it disabled here, but if I turn on my default light, you probably will see something similar to this. This is called a point light. I don't really like to use point lights all that often, so I usually delete that or disable it. I like to add my own, and so I'm going to hold or press Shift A and go to light, and we have a few different kinds here. I find the area light gives me a nice soft light, and you can actually change some parameters of this light. So I'm going to move it up into place. So we're going to do GZ to move that up, and I'm going to turn on my rotation handles here. Let's just rotate that in a few. Let's just try to maybe get some light coming from the front. And if I go to this control here, I can get all of these controls at the same time. So let's just move it off to the front. So this will be what we're calling our key light. And a key light is your strongest, brightest light. If we press S to scale, you can actually scale up the area that transmits light from this object. And in a 3-point lighting setup, which is typically what you'll find in something like a studio lighting setup for products or portraits or what have you, they have 3 in key locations here. So this is, like I said, our key light. That's going to be our brightest. I'm going to do Shift D to duplicate, and we'll just move that over here. We could rotate that around. And so the idea here is this light's going to contribute less light to our scene, and this one will be much brighter. So we're going to go to the settings for this light here, down under the light bulb, and you can only get to that when this is selected. So instead of 10 watts, let's just put in 100. And this takes some trial and error. This depends on the scale of your scene, things like that. So you may have to increase or decrease power depending on your unique situation. So this one is still a bit low. So I'm going to change this to maybe 80 watts and maybe increase the brightness to something much higher, like 500 watts. And now we're getting a really bright key light here happening. All right, we'll go ahead and adjust these in a minute. I'm going to actually duplicate this one, and we'll move it over here behind our object. Let's just rotate the direction of that. And so this light is called a rim light or a hair light, depending on the situation. A hair light because it is supposed to highlight aspects of hair in portrait photography. A rim light would essentially accomplish the same thing, where it creates a rim of light or to create more contrast between an object and its background. So again, just to recap, we have a key light, a fill light, which fills the shadows with a bit of light. You can use a reflector for that sometimes. You don't have to use a light source. And then we have our rim light in the back. Okay, so let's just maybe do a 3/4 view here. Okay, so if we wanted to make sure we get our backdrop in the background, I'm going to rotate the backdrop just so it's like this. I could rotate the object as well, but I think in this case it's easier to just rotate that background. Okay, and so if you want to zoom in and out on this object, what you can do is come here into the View tab, and under Lock Camera to View, if this is unchecked, you actually can't zoom in, rotate, or manipulate your camera. So go ahead and click Lock Camera to View, and that will enable it to operate just like your viewport camera will. So just like this camera does when you're working on your objects. Now your render camera will operate the same way. Okay, I'm going to press N on the keyboard to collapse that panel. And let's just take a look at what our render looks like. So if you come up to Render and click on Render Image, what it will do is it will look at your scene's render settings, which is, it looks like a printer icon, and you have a resolution set up. So we can see I've got a wide resolution set up here for the render I'm going to do for the website banner. But you might have something more like 1920 by, 1920, let's try that again, by 1080p. Okay, and so you should have a resolution that's more like this. We'll do this for now. Okay, so I'm not really getting everything I want, but let's do a render first, just to see if we like our composition and if the quality is going to be good enough. So let's click Render. See, it pops up a new window here, and because we're using cycles, it will actually go through and do tiles. And so this might take a few minutes depending on the speed of your computer, the type of hardware that you have. If you have a GPU that's compatible with Blender, you can configure that to go a little bit faster. But for now, we're just going to wait for this to finish. Okay, so just to show a comparison, I will also render at a different sampling level. So let me change the slot here. So we're gonna go to slot 2, and that just makes it so if our render gets rendered again, we can sort of switch back to slot 1 and get access to our previous render. So let's go to slot 2. I'm gonna close this out, and I had my sampling set pretty high. So if you wanna get to your sampling settings, you can go here to your scene settings, looks like a camera. And under sampling, you can see that render is set to 250. You may see something like 128. So I'm gonna lower this down to something like 72. So this is a pretty low sample. It's only slightly higher than our viewport sampling, but if we go ahead and render this, you can see it's rendering much quicker. Okay, so let's zoom in here and take a look at what we have. All right, so I'm just looking at the shadows here. And if we switch to slot 1, so slot 1 took about over 2 minutes to render, and slot 2 took 37 seconds. So you can see that adjusting the sampling to be higher makes the render time take much longer. But the quality of the render is going to be much better because the sampling sort of does a better job reducing noise, and it's sort of a more accurate render. So this is pretty good. What you want to do is typically try to balance, when you're using cycles at least, the reduction of noise here versus how long it takes to render. So because this is a fairly simple render and 2 minutes isn't really a very long time to wait, we could essentially put the settings up. Instead of being 250, which is what this was rendered at, we could set this up to be 500 or 700 samples, and it would start taking much longer, but you would start reducing the the noise here that's in your render. I think 250 is pretty good, especially since we're looking at it from this distance. But certainly 72 is not going to be enough. I mean, this is really grainy. It's not an attractive render. It's kind of poorer quality than we're trying to get out of this. So I would say, anything above 200 is going to give you a decent render for this type of render. You're just going to have to look at your results. Okay, so now that we are done rendering, taking a look at how we can increase the quality of our renders, let's take a look at how we can adjust our lighting to be a bit more pleasing.